Movie Resident Evil. Welcome to Raccoon City Review. The reboot wisely trades action for horror, but it's not enough. Resident Evil. Welcome to Raccoon City Review. The reboot wisely trades action for horror, but it's not enough. Sony. By Chris Evangelista. November 24, 2021, 11:55 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Whatever you want to call the Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil film series, I don't think you can accurately call it a series of horror films. Sure, there are plenty of horror elements in those movies, they're about zombies, after all, but at the end of the day, Anderson, no stranger to horror having helmed the excellent Event Horizon, was more interested in action. As a result, Anderson's films were shoot-em-ups that allowed star Milla Jovovich to flip around in slow motion like she was auditioning for The Matrix. Another thing about Anderson's series, it wasn't very faithful to the games. Sure, there were elements of the various games peppered throughout the films, but fans wanted more. With the reboot Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City, writer-director Johannes Roberts, 47 Meters Down, Strangers, Pray at Night, hopes to return Resident Evil to its roots. The new film leans into its direct references from the games. More than that, it leans into horror. There are occasional bursts of gunfire here, but Raccoon City is a horror movie first, action movie second. And maybe that'll be enough for hardcore fans of the game who felt screwed over by Anderson's films. I'm a big fan of Resident Evil, both the games and movies, and the books, if you want to include them. Having played all the core games, up to and including Resident Evil Village, and having seen all the movies, Resident Evil, Apocalypse is my favorite. I like to think of myself as well versed in the IE universe. I was very excited to see a more faithful adaptation of the games into a movie, so I jumped at the chance to review Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. The film opens ominously enough, with two young children asleep in bed at the Raccoon City orphanage. The young girl is awoken by a figure that is all too familiar to fans of the remake. The young boy then wakes up and tells her to go back to sleep, that she had dreamed the whole thing. She lays back down but quickly gets back up and follows the figure out of the room. She eventually finds the figure and is then found by Dr. Birkin, played by Neil McDonough. We then find out that the kids are none other than the Redfield siblings, Chris and Claire, Robbie Amell and Kaya Scodelario, respectively. But whatever the flaws of the previous Resident Evil series, those films were never as dull as Raccoon City. Roberts doesn't seem to know how to milk anything resembling genuine horror out of the material here. Instead, he and cinematographer Maxim Alexandra seem to think dark equals scary, is the only rule they need to follow. As a result, Raccoon City is smothered in almost impenetrable darkness. I get that the entire movie takes place during one rainy night, but there's a way to shoot such darkness and still have your imagery register. Instead, Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City is often so murky it looks like the entire thing was filmed through a bowl of soup. These two events are a quick derivation from the history of the characters from the games. It was a little off-putting at first, but I quickly let it go and decided that this was not going to be strictly following the games. I completely understand that, unless you're Martin Scorsese in Shutter Island, a word-for-word retelling isn't necessarily what's best for the film. It's 1998, and Claire Redfield, Kaya Scodelario, is returning home to Raccoon City. She's not exactly thrilled about this, she only has bad memories of the place, especially of the orphanage she grew up in with her brother Chris, Robbie Amell. Claire and Chris haven't spoken in 5 years, but recently, Claire has heard stories about bad things going on in Raccoon City. These stories come from the internet, from a chat room, specifically. And since it's 1998, the movie has Chris Redfield greet this news with a question, what the F*** is a chat room? The 90s setting allows Resident Evil to cut down on means of communication, almost no one has a cell phone, and the one person who does only uses it to play the mobile game Snake. Soon, when all the phone lines in town go down, the unlucky residents will be completely cut off. Raccoon City was once home to the mighty pharmaceutical giant the Umbrella Corporation. But Umbrella is packing up and moving elsewhere, a decision that has caused many residents to flee, turning Raccoon City into something of a ghost town. But there's a big reason Umbrella is pulling up stakes. They've been conducting nefarious experiments, and those experiments have actually poisoned the town's water supply, to the point where most of the residents are now turning into zombie-like creatures hungry for flesh. All of this happens just as Claire rolls into town, and while she tries to warn Chris, he doesn't believe her. Instead, he heads off to work as a Raccoon City cop, where he joins up with his fellow officers Jill Valentine, Hannah John Kamen, and Albert Wesker, Tom Hopper. Also at the station, sleepy rookie Leon S. Kennedy, Ivan Jogia, and Chief Irons, played by a very shouty Donal Logue. Jill, Chris, and Albert head off to investigate a report at the spooky Spencer mansion, and that's when the *T really hits the fan. A few minutes later and we're introduced to most of the rest of the cast: Leon, Ivan Jogia, Jill, Hannah John Kamen, and Wesker, Tom Hopper, in a diner. Leon is just arriving in town and is asleep on his stool at the counter, and the others are at their own table talking and joking. Here we really see the difference between the characters in-game and in the film. The interactions between Jill and Wesker are strange, coming from my experience with them in the Resident Evil games. They are too friendly. We're clearly going in a different direction, and I had to remind myself that we're here for it. The interactions between Jill and Wesker are strange, coming from my experience with them in the Resident Evil games. They are too friendly. Claire's arrival in town is far more eventful than Leon's, seeing her hitchhiking her way to Raccoon City with the driver of the tanker truck that she almost gets run over by in Resident Evil 2. They hit a zombie outside of town who then mysteriously vanishes into the woods. They are both shaken, and after some talking, they continue on their way, dropping her off near her brother's home in town. This basic setup is fine, and you get the sense that Roberts is trying to channel John Carpenter movies like Assault on Precinct 13 and Prince of Darkness. Even the title cards that count down the hours of the night have a typeface that looks like the Albertus font Carpenter liked to use for his titles. Soon, Claire, Leon, and Irons are stuck at the station while Jill, Chris, and Albert navigate the mansion. Both locations are besieged by gals screaming, gnashing zombies who all have receding hairlines for some reason. It's bad enough you turn into a zombie, but you have to go bald, too. Brutal. And that's it, really. There's not much more to Resident Evil. Welcome to Raccoon City. Simplicity is fine, in theory. After all, many of Carpenter's movies could be called simplistic. And yet, Welcome to Raccoon City ultimately feels undercooked, as if Roberts simply typed up a bunch of stuff from the games he wanted to see in the film and then forgot to write a story around them. There are flashbacks to Claire and Chris' childhood, where they were at the mercy of a creepy doctor, Neil McDonough. And there's an admittedly disturbing figure known as Lisa Trevor, who appears to be wearing someone's skinned face as a mask. But the film doesn't investigate these elements further. Perhaps if you're well versed in the games you won't need any further info, but what about the rest of us? Someone, somewhere, is going to angrily proclaim that this is a movie just for the fans. And I'm sorry, but that's the worst possible way to make a movie, and it's the type of thinking that's ruining modern Hollywood blockbusters. Scodelario, who was so good in the incredibly enjoyable monster movie Crawl, so much so that she pretty much carried that entire film on her shoulders, is unfortunately lost here. She seems bored, and I can't blame her. I was bored, too. It doesn't help that there's absolutely nothing to any of the characters. We have no real insight into who they are, or what makes them tick. Leon is lazy, I guess. There are 2 different scenes where he sleeps through something that a normal person would never sleep through. Chief Irons yells at LOT. Jill is good at shooting guns. Chris is, well, I have no idea. The most we learn about him is that he leaves a pile of dirty dishes in his sink. Oh, and he has a motorcycle. None of these characters make an impression, which makes it kind of hard to care if they're on the cusp of being torn apart by the Walking Dead. From here, the plot moves forward about as well as it can. Set in the late stages of summer in 1998, Raccoon City has been largely deserted as the Umbrella Corporation is moving their facilities out of town, leaving some police and those who can't afford to move away. A truck crash and a few zombies later, the name of the game is Survival and Escape from Raccoon City. The locations in this film are very familiar. A few of them looked almost identical to the games, and I was very happy to see that. The familiar RPD station, with the glowing sign out front, had me fanboying on the inside, and the interior of the Spencer estate looked amazing. A truck crash and a few zombies later, the name of the game is Survival and Escape from Raccoon City. What I liked most about this movie was that very little is explained. The viewer doesn't get a lot of information outright because the characters don't know anything either. They're simply trying to survive, and explanations can come later. But again, maybe none of this will matter to hardcore fans of the games. Maybe they'll all nod and smile and say, "I understood that reference." And maybe that's all movies are now. A series of winking nods and familiar references, one big stupid in-joke that you need to do homework to understand. Why make a movie that transcends boundaries when you can make one that says, "Hey, remember this thing? Here it is again. Now give us some money." Nothing is new anymore. Nothing is fresh. Everything is IP. Familiar, focus group tested, easily digested IP. We don't have movies now. We have content. Wall-to-wall content that threatens to suck us down into grey, formless sludge, turning our brains to jelly in the process. Hooray for Hollywood! So, sure, if you want a bunch of familiar beats from the Resident Evil games rendered into scenes so underlit you can't make out what the hell is happening on the screen, then let me be the first to say, welcome to Raccoon City. The film will go down easy and leave you completely unsatiated, so you can say, well, maybe this one was bad, but the next one will be better. Because of course Welcome to Raccoon City ends with a setup for a sequel. And if that sequel never happens, don't worry, we'll have another reboot in a few years and we'll get to do this dance all over again. Johannes Roberts has talent. 47 Meters Down is a fun bit of sharksploitation, and Strangers, Prey at Night is a stylish blast full of great slasher movie throwbacks, even if it feels completely different from the first Strangers movie. I have no doubt the director will move on to better things at some point, and I also have no doubt he entered Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City with the best intentions. But none of that excuses such a pointless exercise as this. Easter eggs abound in the film as well. I recall seeing an ad for first aid spray in the opening sequence and laughing out loud. I won't give them all away, but some of them are really clever. Any references to the Resident Evil games instantly brought a smile to my face. Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City is a major step away from the other films. This adaptation is far more atmospheric. It relies on the dark of night and general emptiness of the town to set the tone. The characters' confusion adds even more mystery and dark undertones to the film. Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City is a major step away from the other films. This adaptation is far more atmospheric. The writing was good, on the whole. There were a few moments when I thought to myself, yeesh, that's not a great line, but the script was serviceable. My biggest gripe with the script comes from Wesker. After seeing the way his character developed in the games, and remembering how he got started in Raccoon City, I was left wanting something more. This isn't an issue with acting, or even Hopper himself. The script opted to go a different direction than the Resident Evil games, and it did the character a disservice, in my opinion. Fans of the Resident Evil series, especially Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2, may find themselves disappointed by some of the creative changes that have been made to this film. Some characters and backstories have been changed to serve the film's purposes, though it remains to be seen whether this helps or hinders the series in the long term. Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City is a film I really wanted to love. While I enjoyed the atmosphere, the character direction, mostly, and the progression of the story, I do feel there is room for improvement. Hopefully, a subsequent sequel will build on the foundation set up here and take in new and darker directions. There is a lot of potential to develop a series of films here. There was a lot of trimming to be done to fit 2 full games into one movie. So have you watched this movie yet? Let us know what you think about the movie in the comments below.